Our first panel is on launching Europe's deep tech factory. It is moderated by Hello Tomorrow's own CEO, Arnaud de la Tour. Over to you, Arnaud.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm very happy to organize this discussion with two deep tech leaders. Antoine Gourevitch is Managing Director and Senior Partner for the Boston Consulting Group, one of our key partners for a long time. And he's leading BCG's initiatives in deep tech, research efforts on emerging technologies, and BCG's global work on data and digital platforms. He specializes in shaping the impact of those technologies in several industries, such as mobility or finance. Jean-Éric Paquet is Director General of DG Research and Innovation since 2018. His career at the European Commission actually started quite earlier in 1993, sorry. And since then, he has contributed in shaping the EU policy in various fields and achieved major breakthrough included in DG Transport. And he also gained considerable experience at an international level. Unfortunately, he could not join us this morning live, but we still could record a video so that he can address some key messages, and we'd like to start with hearing those messages.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to be able to speak at the Hello Tomorrow event or conference. With a bit of frustration, I must say, because as the first lockdown took place earlier this year, I was essentially nearly on the plane to Paris to participate in the event. And now again, I'm addressing you by video because I cannot join you digitally. But I hope there will be opportunities in the future also to work together. I'm delighted to be able to say a few words because the European Union is now increasingly ramping up its efforts, its resources, also its instruments to help innovators in Europe be supported, but also scale up better, faster, and in Europe. You are, of course, well aware, because you are a part of that success, that Europe is a place where startups emerge on a very, very large scale already. We have in Europe invested in regions, around universities, around industry, in ecosystems to support the emergence of startup. Seed financing is available on a very large basis in Europe. And with success, because you are, as European startups on a yearly basis, you are more numerous than startups in any other part of the world. So ideas, talent, risk-taking, Europe is not lagging behind at all. Where admittedly we need to improve is indeed on scaling up. Rounds A, rounds B of financing are in many cases still more challenging in Europe. Possibly also because scaling up in Europe happens differently than in other parts of the world, like the United States. I think it probably happens slightly less fast. I think the tradition of burning money is much less a tradition here in Europe. And as you grow and develop, you also are very much connected to market growth. And this is, of course, to an extent, a different growth path. But at the same time, what I think is also true, and what policymakers in member states have well identified, and there's a lot of support on scaling up already available in member states. In France, for example, but also in Germany, in Finland, there are many good examples of instruments and programs which support scaling up of startups or small and medium-sized innovators across Europe. But at EU level, we have decided to add, if you want, to that national effort. And we created, together with our member states, the European Innovation Council. The European Innovation Council was envisaged a few years ago already, We are today in 19 and 20 in a very large-scale pilot for that European Innovation Council. Around €1.5 billion euros are available for that pilot phase, and the European Innovation Council will be deployed full scale as of next year under the next research program, Horizon Europe. The orders of magnitudes of funding on a yearly basis will be around €1 billion, €1.5 billion, so quite significant funding and financing available for scaling up to take place. What we hope to make a difference on with the European Innovation Council is on deep tech innovation. We believe, and I think the analysis is shared by many in the high tech and innovation sphere, we believe that the next wave of innovation will not be only digital. Of course, there are still plenty of amazing digital innovations taking place, including in Europe, but that the next wave will be at the intersection of digital and physical, already happening, and increasingly in deep tech, be it in biology, in engineering, areas where Europe has a particularly powerful tradition. And we believe that combining digital with engineering, with deep tech developments will allow Europe to be at the forefront of that innovation wave. And this is what the European Innovation Council is largely about. With a number of instruments, the Pathfinder and the Accelerator. The Pathfinder is about bringing together innovators and scientists to develop science which can then lead to innovation. Very closely connected also to the work happening in Europe in the European Research Council, what I call our Nobel Prize Factory. The European Research Council has a proof of concept which is closely connecting also with this Pathfinder of the European Innovation Council. But then the more visible and possibly very powerful part of the European Innovation Council is what we call the Accelerator, which we tested at scale in 19 and 20, where we want to make available probably Series A types of funding and financing for scaling up to take place, and this in the form of grant funding, but also equity. And that is a way of approaching support to innovative startups and SMEs, which is usually not available. And in the pilot phase, the model has proven to be rather very successful. Why this blending? The blending is because we believe that in many cases, market financing for deep tech innovative companies is not so easy to access. I mean, firstly, because it can be costly, but secondly, also because often there is science involved, difficult to assess for venture capitalists, and sometimes also science involved with research still needed to bring products to the market. And by construction, such research efforts are highly risky with an outcome which is not always easy to anticipate. So blending is therefore very relevant and very necessary. But we found in preparing the European Innovation Council, and the pilot is, I think, confirming that it makes sense from the outset also to blend this grant component with equity. And we have therefore, in the European Innovation Council, created the European Innovation Council Fund, which makes available equity at the same time as the grant is being made available. And that equity then, of course, equips companies as they grow, as the research is carried out, as the risk diminishes, also with a strong basis to attract investors. In fact, the EIC fund also will have as a role to engage with founders, startups, CEOs. As we discuss the support of the EIC, this grant and equity component, we will then also discuss and try to help to see whether there is from the outset interest already from other investors. I mean, we are speaking of tickets of a few million euros, up to 10-15 million euros, if that is justified by the research and by the development needed for the company. We want to really find the deep tech innovation which will make a difference in Europe, We will have bottom-up calls, so you can come with your ideas, whatever the idea. We also will have more targeted calls around artificial intelligence, around the Green Deal transformation of Europe. We had a few months ago a particularly successful call also on responses to COVID-19. We believe that innovation can make a difference for society, not just in terms of competitiveness, productivity, yes, that is very important, but also in terms of driving transformations into our society to make Europe digital and green into the future. And finding the best innovation is about really reaching out, as my teams are doing with you in Hello Tomorrow today, and also in convincing you to come forward with your ideas. In fact, we have thousands of applicants in each round, so to an extent, many more than we expected. I think testimony to the deep tech revolution happening silently in Europe. But also to the fact that you believe that the EIC can make a difference for your innovation. So you come forward with an idea. We will try, as we move into the fully fledged European Innovation Council, to make that initial pitch as light as possible. And then once we have selected the most promising ideas and teams, there is then an interview phase, which you are very familiar with as you engage with venture capital as well. And we find that in this interview phase, where you will be grilled, if you want, by scientists, but also bankers, financiers, also experts which know the innovation ecosystem very well, that this is going to be for you a real opportunity to showcase your idea, to showcase the science between your idea, but also to show us how committed and energetic and smart the team behind the company also is. And with that double track of a written application and then these interviews, I very much expect that we will be able to really find very, very promising, disruptive deep tech innovations. So the first portfolios are here and there for you to look at. They are on the EIC web presence, so you can see with that what type of companies have been successful so far. A lot of very exciting stuff across the board, and I hope that many of you listening in now and part of the conference will be interacting with our teams in the European Innovation Council. Come and meet us, and if you find that you are the next disruptive deep tech innovation in Europe, you must apply, and I hope we will be able to help. Thank you very much for allowing me to this digital opening, and I very much hope that there will be further opportunities in the future to speak at Hello Tomorrow, ideally in the meeting itself in Paris. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Eric Paquet, for explaining so clearly Europe's ambition, but also instruments to not only foster startup creation, but also scale up in Europe. That's indeed very important. I'm very happy, Antoine, to follow up on this discussion with you. I started with a brief introduction, so maybe you want to say a few words about yourself and about how you are engaged and involved with deep tech.
Thank you, Arnaud. So I've been, 25 years with BCG, mostly involved in technology, internet and digital, and now I'm working with deep tech. I guess the reason why BCG is interested in deep tech is because 2 years ago, the CEO asked us a question. Digital has been extremely powerful as a wave, but we see that, I'm not saying it's behind us, but I say, it's pretty clear what it's doing. And the question is, what's next? And in this what's next, how can it solve the big issues we have in front of us, from climate change to energy to mobility or to food? And what we discover in the last 2 years, also working with you a lot, is that actually we see that deep tech could be a way to fundamentally transform the value chain of the industries and able to solve the big challenge. So what are we doing at BCG in deep tech? First of all, we are identifying, what are the key emerging technologies and how they're evolving and what is their maturity. We are also finding out what are the deep tech companies that we think will be the winners in the space. And we are, of course, working with universities and labs, like the one from Zurich in ETH or MIT and many others, to work with PhDs and luminaries. And also, we are working with our clients with the methodology that we have invented, which is called the reactor, to solve big questions with deep tech. So just to give you an example, one of our clients asked us how to reduce vaccine time by 100, by a factor of 100 and reducing the cost by 20. And we have this methodology using the deep tech ecosystem, both the PhDs, the startups, and of course all the techs, to be able to solve these challenges.
Thank you. It's quite interesting. And listening to you, the fact that you engage startups, the ecosystem in general, but also at Jean-Eric Paquet's speech about Europe Instruments, we really see that startups are at the center of what before we might consider more the job of big companies, meaning to bring breakthrough technologies that at least used to cost a lot to bring to the markets. So the question I have for you is, really, yes, a few decades ago, it was mainly about big companies. So why do you think now startups are able to break into markets, into industries where usually it was mostly big public or private organizations?
Yeah, and for me, that's really what has changed. And thank you for your question, because I think it's really the one. The first time I've seen a fabulous experience. It was in the lab of Alain Aspect. Alain Aspect made this experience, about demonstrating entanglements in quantum mechanics. And this experiment, which was done in France, led to the creation of two new industries. One was about the quantum computer, and one was quantum cryptography. And this experiment has been done in 1983. And today we are in 2020, and I must say that quantum cryptography and quantum computing, they are starting, but it's still in infancy. So it used to take a long time from lab to market. But in Alain Space Lab, there is a startup that you've distinguished, I think it was Wednesday, which is called Pascal, which is building an analog quantum processor. And actually this startup has some industrial applications which are very impressive in the smart grid, for example, optimization and many others. And this startup have been created in the last years, and it's becoming faster. And I think this is very important. It used to be very big discovery, but taking a lot of time to startups that are able to do a
I was just watching Antoine in the on the YouTube.
Sorry,
there was some noise. And to a prototype that costs, a few $100K or a few $1 million or a few $1 million, which is, I think, totally changes the game. And this is what we call at BCG the third wave of innovation. The first wave was, as you said, the wave of the IBM, Xerox, that were really hiring a lot of PhDs, getting lots of Nobel Prizes. The second wave was the Silicon Valley wave, which gave birth to the Google and Amazon of the world. And in this wave, there was many investments, I would say, in internet digital or in synthetic biology. But what we see now is a totally different wave, where we see investment in many technologies, from robotics and nanotechnology, advanced material, of course, continuing to play in synthetic biology, quantum, and many others. And because all of these technology are kind of getting into digital and getting the exponential factor, it is going much faster now. And because there is so much money available, also, we see things that used to be impossible possible. And what I feel is the reason it is happening is because we see merging science, all these emerging technologies I've been speaking about, with engineering and design thinking. So what used to be an innovation process which was kind of binary and very risky is now becoming an innovation process led with engineering and design thinking in a typical, what we call the design, build, test, and learn approach. And this is made much faster because on each stage of the cycle, you have lots of data available that can allow you to accelerate the thing. And if I were to make a comparison, I would say that 2020 is what is for deep tech what 1995 was for digital. In 1995, it was the birth of companies like eBay, Amazon. I think in 2020, we have the birth of companies that will have the same type of impact in the world. And just to give you maybe a few examples, we see platform companies appearing. So I was speaking about Amazon on the cloud. I would like to speak about a company which is named Ginkgo Bioworks, which is based in Boston. And Ginkgo is a very interesting company because it is becoming the Amazon Web Services of synthetic biology. So, for example, what Ginkgo is doing, they are doing a platform which is merging robotics and also a DNA platform that is able to produce any cell you would like to have based on enzyme and mammalian protein and everything. So basically, you just ask them what you want, and with they can program it, and they can design the cell you would like to use. So of course, you can use that for yourself. Ginkgo is using it in partnership, but also there can be any startup that wants to design a cell can ask Ginkgo Bioworks to do that for them. And there are many other companies like that, so which faster, which accelerate the speed of innovation. And the reason why it is happening is because the whole process is kind of what I call de-risk. The successful deep tech ventures are doing 4 things. The first thing is they are problem-oriented, not solution or technology-oriented. And I think it's very important. You don't succeed by just having an idea about technology. You are succeeding because you want to solve a big problem. So, for example, one of the big problems to be solved is the fertilizer problem. As you know, nitrogen is a big issue because to produce nitrogen, it produces 4% of greenhouse gas emission. And of course, it pollutes water because only 50% of the nitrogen is used by the plants for which we are using fertilizer. And to solve this problem, either you can use quantum computing, so it's a technology, but you will just reduce greenhouse gases, or you just try to think, okay, how does nature does it? And nature does it very easily by fixing, nitrogen at the roots of the plant and using nitrogen which is present in the atmosphere. And actually, Ginkgo Bioworks and Bayer are developing bacteria that can exactly do that. So and it's faster because, of course, Ginkgo has this platform. So this is typically, why it's happening and happening bigger. I think what's also important is playing the ecosystem, and I think that's extremely important. And I think Jean-Eric mentioned it. So, for example, if you want to address the fusion system to produce clean energy, just like the sun is producing, energy, we have a startup which is called a Commonwealth fusion system, stemming from MIT, which is really working with the MIT Center of Plasma, working with a few large companies like E&I and Equinor, of course, working with the ecosystem of venture capital and with Breakthrough Energy Venture. And of course, the US government is interested. So if you play the ecosystem well, it's also accelerating a lot between big corporation, labs, venture capitalists, of course, and the public system. The third point, which I think is really making a difference, is to adopt a design thinking approach with a deep tech inside. And one of the company, I guess, which receives the prize of Hello Tomorrow, which is Lilium Aviation. Lilium Aviation is a air robot taxi company, trying to change mobility, solving mobility. What I find very interesting in Lilium Aviation is when they design a prototype, they start with the 2-seaters, then they went to a 3- and 5-seaters. And of course, it's a drone. So you see the acceleration with exponential of robotics. But what they do is whenever they do a test, so whenever there is a flight, all the data is captured, put into a platform, and everything that is learned goes back to the engineering so that the next prototype can be designed even better. So they are really applying the design, build, test, learn approach to reduce risk and accelerate everything. And the last one is design to cost, which I think is very important. Because if you don't start with, having the right cost in mind and thinking at cost from the start, you will never make it happen. And I think this is what was hindering a lot of the lab's research before. And we can see that, for example, in, companies that are producing meats or companies that are producing films for electronics that are now really having this design to cost approach. So all of this is making what seems impossible possible much faster. And for me, this is what I call the deep tech revolution.
Thank you. And it's actually a nice also introduction to another session I have with another partner from the Boston Consulting Group, Massimo, this afternoon at 3:40. So I'm making a little bit of advertising for our session. And you talked about the fact that it's another wave, not kind of the one that started in the Silicon Valley. And I definitely agree. And one of the dimensions, beyond the fact that it's not only about technology, and for all the dimensions you mentioned, it's really new. It's also really global. And you also talked about Lilium Aviation, which is the winner of More Challenge in 2016. And they are very successful today. They actually raised recently a $240 million round, becoming one of the first European deep tech unicorns. So it shows that, yes, it's definitely happening everywhere, including in Europe. And as the Boston Consulting Group is a global management consulting firm, you have also a view of what's going on in China, in the US, also in Europe. So I would like to have your impression about maybe the differences between those two regions, because we know that it's kind of a global competition, a global race that is starting also with the deep tech revolution. So what do you feel in terms of focus or strategy of those three regions? Sorry.
Yes, so maybe I'll start with China, which for me is probably the most interesting one. So I think China has always had, a long-term view. I remember the first time I was there, I think it was 2001. I was working at the time on a mobility project, and I met with Minister of Industry, and he told me China will be the leader in battery for the electric vehicle. It was 2001, and which they are today. So they have a long-term vision, and they're able to pour a lot of money into many technologies. And today, so behind electronics and of course the batteries, they have chose to focus on artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and blockchain. I remember I met a blockchain, startup, and actually it was already funded with $200 million money, doing things as large as most of the largest US companies were doing at the time. So, and it was only 3 years ago. So today, China is able to invest a lot of money in these companies. And remember, companies like Alibaba, just like Google or Microsoft, are, investing $10 billion a year in the cloud. Same as Google, by the way. So which means that, so to get to the scale you want, you need to get a lot of money, which is something we should think as part of the European Union. I think China, on the new technology like quantum computing, like 3D printing, gene editing, etc., they're also investing. They are probably looking at what's happening in Europe and US and going then going there. When they go there, they go it very big. So basically, they establish a cluster and they basically ask researchers, universities, and governments to collaborate. And it's extremely efficient. So we've seen it in the past. We're going to see it in the future. I do believe that China is catching up very fast in emerging tech. And remember, every year, China produces as much engineer as the world stock of the world. So it will have an impact. And because the way they are managing it is what I call the gardener way, meaning that they decide, on the field, and they decide what the field will look like, and they make it happen, which can be quite interesting from a view of a European person, because, they will send people to a small town where there's a university to really create the ecosystem there, which will not happen like that in Europe or in the US. Actually, they are, I would say, for me, in the next 5 years, the people with the most investment and probably the most interesting stuff will come from China. There are also, advantages of being there. I think in terms of ability to search on a large population and to do a lot of experiments, as we've seen in artificial intelligence. I would say the US are continuing to work as they've always been. So you basically have, the cluster around Silicon Valley, and around Stanford and Berkeley, the cluster in Boston with Harvard and MIT. You have a few other clusters, which is very much, I would say, driven by DARPA, DARPA being the defense agency which is investing in new technology. It is a very interesting way of doing things. So DARPA has been created after Sputnik. There was in the US a Sputnik moment where they heard the beep, beep, beep was not very pleasant for them. And it was something they didn't see coming. And they created DARPA to say, okay, we don't want to have any new technology to surprise us. We want to be the one who do the surprises. So, for example, what we see in the autonomous vehicle was a challenge created by DARPA, where you had lots of universities and Google at the time who were in the Moab desert to create the autonomous vehicle. So DARPA is really pushing new industries. Same with semiconductor. Most of the American companies we've seen today have been creating through the DARPA challenges. So in the US, it's really the traditional cluster plus DARPA creating, new clusters. In Europe, I see a much more, I would say, fragmented place. So of course, you see, France and England with very good universities. So there is a cluster in London, there is one close to Oxford and Cambridge, there is one in Paris, but also not only in Paris, because we like to spread also investments. There is, of course, what you see in Netherlands, Germany, but it's very fragmented. And I wonder, so of course you could say in a digital world, the fragmentation should not be an issue and probably we should collaborate a bit more. But as I think that deep tech is all about ecosystem, I wonder how we should defragment and concentrate our investments in a few places, which probably would be more efficient. So that's where that's what I see from the many visits I've been doing.
So we hope that also with what Jean-Henri Paquet announced, we'll manage to leverage the advantages of fragmentation, so being close to local universities and local talents, while structuring a very strong European ecosystem. I think we are heading towards the end of the session. So thank you very much, Antoine. Thank you very much also to Jean-Henri Paquet. And again, you should definitely join the session we are having with Massimo this afternoon at 3:40, where we will dive into some of the elements that Antoine already introduced. The fact that the deep tech revolution is not only about technology, it's a new approach also. And we'll also talk about what you introduced about how we can leverage the power of nature. So thank you very much and enjoy the day.
Thanks to you.